At 100 years old, Dick Van Dyke is not just a Hollywood legend. He is a living witness to nearly a full century of American entertainment. He has outlasted the golden age of television, the studio system of old Hollywood, and almost every single person who helped build his career. But living that long comes at a cost that fame can never soften. The slow, repeated goodbye to the people who walked beside him. In his own words, he has said that he has lost a great many friends, and that outliving nearly everyone he loved feels less like a victory and more like a kind of curse. Today, we are looking at 6 deaths that shaped Dick Van Dyke's long life, in the order they happened to him, ending with a loss that struck just one day after he blew out the candles on his 100th birthday. Before we get into those 6 losses, it helps to understand who Dick Van Dyke actually is, because his story is unusual even by Hollywood standards. He was born in West Plains, Missouri, in December of 1925, and grew up mostly in Danville, Illinois, in a family that was not wealthy. As a young man, he did not set out to become an entertainer at all. He was active in his church and briefly considered becoming a minister, but a growing love of performing pulled him toward the stage instead. During World War II, he served in the United States Army Air Forces, where he entertained troops in variety shows and worked as a radio announcer, an experience that pointed him firmly toward a life in show business once the war ended. He built his early career in radio, then in local television, then as half of a comedy pantomime duo, sharpening the physical comedy skills that would define him for the rest of his life. A breakout role in the Broadway musical Bye Bye Birdie won him a Tony Award and caught Hollywood's attention. That led directly to The Dick Van Dyke Show in 1961, and from there to a career that included Mary Poppins, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the long-running series Diagnosis, Murder, and a surprise dance number in Mary Poppins Returns performed when he was in his 90s. Along the way, he built friendships that lasted decades, and losing those friends one by one has become one of the defining themes of his later years. The first loss on this list goes back to the very heart of Dick Van Dyke's career, because it involves the woman who played his wife on television. When The Dick Van Dyke Show was being cast in 1961, the production had already auditioned dozens of actresses for the role of Laura Petrie without finding the right fit. Then a 23-year-old dancer and commercial actress named Mary Tyler Moore walked into the room. Van Dyke has said his very first reaction was to wonder whether she was too young for the part, but it did not take long for that doubt to disappear. He has described watching her grow into performer. She became as one of the great thrills of his career, and he later called their 5 years together on that show the best 5 years of his life. Their comedic chemistry became one of television's most celebrated pairings, built on split-second timing and a shared instinct for physical comedy that made their scenes together look effortless. Their bond did not end when the show did. They stayed close for the better part of 6 decades, reuniting for specials and industry tributes, including a variety special in the late 1970s that brought them back together on screen. Mary Tyler Moore lived for most of her adult life with type 1 diabetes, and in her later years the disease brought serious complications, including damage to her eyesight. She died in January 2017 at the age of 80. Van Dyke's public reaction was immediate and raw. He posted a short tribute calling her simply the best, and said that the two of them had always believed they'd change each other's lives for the better. In a longer remembrance published the same week, he talked about watching her natural talent take shape in front of him, and said there were really no words big enough for what she meant to him. For a man who had spent a lifetime being funny, the loss of the woman who helped make him famous, and who understood his comic timing better than almost anyone else, marked beginning a long and painful pattern that would repeat itself again and again as he moved deeper into old age. The second loss is arguably the most important professional relationship of Dick Van Dyke's entire life. Because without this man, there may never have been a Dick Van Dyke Show at all. Carl Reiner originally wrote the lead role for himself in a pilot called Head of the Family. When the pilot did not land the way the network wanted, Reiner made a decision that changed television history. Instead of insisting on playing the lead, he stepped back, rewrote the project around Van Dyke's talents, and became the show's creator and head writer instead. That single choice built the foundation of Van Dyke's stardom, and it built a friendship that lasted 60 years. Reiner also appeared on the show himself, playing the blustery, temperamental producer Alan Brady, a role that let the two men spar on screen as often as they collaborated off it. Carl Reiner died in June 2020 at his home in Beverly Hills at the age of 98 from natural causes. Van Dyke's tribute, posted the day after Reiner's death, focused less on a professional partnership and more on the depth of the man himself. He described Reiner as someone who wrote about the human comedy with an understanding of people that went beyond even what Reiner realized about himself, calling him kind, gentle, and wise, and saying his scripts always had something real to say about the people watching them. CBS marked the loss by airing a tribute introduced by Van Dyke alongside classic, newly colorized episodes of their show, a small gesture that let audiences see the two men together one more time. For Van Dyke, Reiner's death did not just take away a collaborator. It took away the person most responsible for turning him into the star the world came to know, and it left a hole that the rest of Hollywood felt right alongside him. From Mel Brooks to Reiner's own son, director Rob Reiner, who called his father's death the loss of his guiding light. The third loss is a friendship that grew out of the extended family, the Dick Van Dyke Show left behind. Ed Asner became a household name in the 1970s playing the gruff but big-hearted news boss Lou Grant on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. The spin-off series built around the very actors Van Dyke had helped launch a decade earlier. Because the two shows shared cast, crew, and a production home, Van Dyke and Asner crossed paths often over the years, including a joint appearance on a 1979 variety special that reunited performers from both series. The friendship deepened through their shared work advocating for other performers. Both men served in leadership roles connected to the Screen Actors Guild, and both cared deeply about the working conditions of character actors who never became household names themselves. Ed Asner died in August 2021 at the age of 91. What makes this loss especially poignant is something Van Dyke did not reveal publicly until years later. Speaking at an event with his wife Arlene in 2025, as he approached his 100th birthday, Van Dyke revealed that he and Asner had actually been planning to team up for a remake of the classic comedy The Odd Couple before Asner's death cut the project short. That would have been such fun, and we lost it. Van Dyke said at the event, adding simply that he had lost a lot of friends over the years. His wife Arlene added her own observation about what it means to live as long as he has, saying that he had outlived nearly everybody, which he called the curse of living to almost 100. It is a small human detail, a movie that never got made, but it captures something true about growing old in an industry built on collaboration. The loss is not only of the person, but of everything you were still planning to build together. The fourth loss connects two performers whose careers ran on parallel tracks through nearly the entire history of American television. Betty White and Dick Van Dyke belonged to the same small circle of entertainers whose careers began in the earliest days of live TV and somehow kept going for 7 decades afterward. Their professional worlds overlapped constantly through mutual friends and collaborators, most of all through Carl Reiner, who adored White for decades and helped connect the overlapping generations of performers who built the sitcom as we know it. White herself went on to win multiple Emmy Awards for playing Sue and Nivens on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, a role she got in large part because of the door Reiner and Van Dyke's original series had opened for Mary Tyler Moore in the first place. By the time both stars reached their 90s, they were among the very last living links to the golden age of variety and sitcom television, and each of them had become a kind of cultural symbol for aging with humor and energy intact. Betty White died on December 31st, 2021, just 17 days shy of her 100th birthday, a milestone the entire country had been eagerly counting down to. The loss hit especially close to home for Van Dyke, who was closing in on the same milestone himself and had long been compared to White as one of the last great examples of a performer who never seemed to slow down. Years later, when Van Dyke's own 100th birthday arrived, White appeared in the celebratory documentary made to mark the occasion, sharing memories recorded before her death alongside contributions from Mary Tyler Moore and Carl Reiner, both of whom had also already passed. Watching that film, Van Dyke was in the unusual position of celebrating his own century of life, surrounded by the recorded voices of friends who did not live to see it with him, a reminder of just how many people from his own generation he was being asked to remember rather than simply celebrate with. The fifth loss reaches back further than any other on this list, to the man who gave Dick Van Dyke his biggest break in movies and became something close to a mentor during the process. By the early 1960s, Van Dyke's television success had caught the attention of Walt Disney, who wanted him for the role of Bert the Chimney Sweep in Mary Poppins. Van Dyke also lobbied hard for a second role in the film, playing the elderly banker Mr. Dawes Sr., reportedly offering to take the part for free and doing a screen test in old-age makeup to convince Disney he could pull it off. Disney agreed, and the experience of making that film together turned into something deeper than a simple working relationship. Van Dyke has spoken about how Disney guided him through the transition from the fast pace of television into the much slower, more demanding world of big-budget filmmaking, and about how the two men shared a similar outlook on entertainment, a belief that the goal of the work was simply to make people feel good. Walt Disney died in December 1966, only a few years after Mary Poppins made Van Dyke one of the most recognizable stars in the country. Disney had been diagnosed with lung cancer and died within weeks of the diagnosis, a shock to an industry that had come to see him as a permanent fixture. For Van Dyke, the loss meant losing not just a boss, but someone who had personally taken a chance on him at a pivotal moment in his career, and then spent real time teaching him how to succeed in a new medium. Even decades later, whenever Van Dyke returned to a Disney project or set foot on the studio lot, he has spoken about feeling the presence of the man who first opened that door for him, and about carrying forward the responsibility of keeping that same spirit of joyful entertainment alive in his own work. The sixth and most recent loss on this list is also the most devastating, both because of how sudden and violent it was, and because of its almost unbearable timing. Dick Van Dyke had known Rob Reiner since Rob was a teenager hanging around the set of The Dick Van Dyke Show, where his father Carl was a creator and head writer. Over more than 60 years, that relationship evolved from a family friendship into something closer, to peers respecting one another's separate careers, as Rob Reiner grew from an actor on All in the Family into one of Hollywood's most respected directors, responsible for films like Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, and This Is Spinal Tap. Van Dyke's wife, Arlene Silver, has said Rob and Carl Reiner were among the very first people she met when she and Van Dyke began dating, underscoring just how central the Reiner family was to Van Dyke's private life, not just his professional one. On